Kimberly, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity for doing this. I'm going to start by apologizing for the text-heavy slides. I promise not to read them verbatim. I know that's a very bad faux pas with PowerPoint, but I really wanted to take this as an opportunity to create a bit of an archive for us. So our neighborhood initiative is really brand new, and this presentation is a great way to capture our beginnings. And I was just thinking, maybe in 5 years when it's time to review and revise like Glendon is doing, we'll be able to see, we can look back and say, how on track were we? Where did we go wrong? What did we miss? And just really look at our beginnings. So I'm going to give you a bit of background on the city of Victoria. We have about 80,000 people here, and most people think of Victoria, they think of the region, the capital region, and that's about 350,000 people. As you can see, 12 municipalities. And in Victoria, we like to break things down even further and to neighborhoods. We've got 13 individual neighborhoods, and in one neighborhood, they've actually split into north and south and prefer to be referred to as separate neighborhoods. So getting down into, a couple of thousand people in a group. So last year, our council launched their 2015-2018 strategic plan, and one of the objectives was to create a Great Neighborhoods initiative, as you can see, based on Edmonton's model. So way to go, Edmonton. And the intention was really to start looking at neighborhoods as opposed to individual streets and try to support the residents from a new lens coming from, when you talk to our residents and you say, where do you live? They don't give you the street, they tell you the neighborhood. So our team is, consists of 3 coordinators and a manager. This is just, we just rearranged our chairs, and there's been no new resources added to it. But almost exactly a year ago, they brought 3 of us together who were already working directly with the neighborhoods in some capacity. So we had our downtown coordinator, who is in the engineering department. Also, as part of his team was downtown programs liaison, who worked primarily with the late night, great night task force, dealing with our night scene downtown with the bars and the pubs and the taxis and the pizza joints, and trying to create a little more order happening in the dark hours. And then myself, who was the community neighborhood and recreation coordinator, and with my role as primarily supporting community centers and the neighborhood associations with some of the projects that they were working on. So really, they've taken my existing role and expanded it and added a couple more people to it. And then we have our manager, and we are all nested in citizen engagement and strategic planning, which is a really interesting compilation. It's communications, the neighborhoods team, we have an interdepartmental team, and we've recently taken on the new parking ambassadors. So I'm not seeing yet how to connect the dots with all of that, but somebody certainly can see some synergies there. So some of our goals include moving from being reactive to being more proactive with the neighborhoods. We used to joke with the fire chief saying that he really had 800 firefighters, because that's what we all felt like we were doing. We were always reacting to the neighbors and putting out fires and dealing with the issues as they arose. So we're really taking this as an opportunity to look at the city work plan and the neighborhood ideas and concerns and try to align them better. That's going to take a couple of years for us to really get out ahead of the curve, but we've started doing a little bit of this work, and so far it's been really well received. Ultimately, we really want to improve our customer service and engage new voices. So some of the benefits that we see for a neighborhood model includes simplifying the process of moving through City Hall by having a point person. We're not trying to take over anybody's roles. If you want a building permit, you still go to the planning department. But some people want to start doing things up in the public realm, and they're not really sure where to go or who to talk to, and inevitably they'll call somebody in City Hall, and then they'll get passed on to somebody else who can answer a couple of their questions, and then they'll get passed on to somebody else. So what we're really trying to do now is say, you know, if you've got something that's out of the ordinary, give the neighborhood coordinator a call, and we'll help you navigate, and we'll gather information so that you're not being passed along from person to person. We're also going to be able to give better notification of projects and the impacts of those projects. A lot of our capital works programs, our sewer rehabilitation, any paving, new sidewalks, those kinds of projects, we are now able to identify them early in the budget process, which has been divided now up by neighborhood, and to be able to give a heads up to the neighborhood saying, this is the kind of work that we're going to be doing in your neighborhood, and once the budget's approved and the schedules are set, then we're going to be able to tell you when you can expect this, and then when we get really close to starting the program or the project, then we'll give you some more information to confirm up those dates. We're also thinking that we'll have quicker response time to service requests by having the coordinators be able to stick handle the concerns straight to the correct department. So from our perspective inside the City Hall, we're going to start to see, and we already have started experiencing, some greater internal efficiencies. And as I said, the work plan's now sorted by the neighborhood, so we can actually see some of the impacts better. And in the past, you know, each department would submit their work plan, and then they'd go out and they do their thing. So planning might be doing something in one neighborhood, and in that same neighborhood there might be a parks project going on, and then there'll be a bunch of streets ripped up because they're doing some kind of transportation project. But the departments weren't really talking to each other. We were all going out and doing great work, but we were having, in some cases, some really dramatic impacts on the neighborhoods. And so now we're able to look at our work plan in a more holistic manner and say, you know what, it actually doesn't really work for us to be in this neighborhood doing all of this work over the course of these 2 months, and we can reschedule that way. Our staff are better informed on neighborhood issues now as well. We're just talking more. Since this whole conversation of neighborhoods has come up, we get calls now from our from all kinds of staff that are saying, hey, I was out and I saw this was happening, and did you know? Or I was at this meeting and I heard this concern or this upset and just wanted to give you a heads up. And the council liaisons are better supported in their roles as well, and I'll give you some examples of how we're doing that a little bit later in this presentation. So are there any questions at this point? Or okay, and we're going to move on. So looking back over our first year, we've created the neighborhood team. We've done a lot of research of best practices. We had Jim Deers come and talk to staff on a couple of occasions and held a community forum. And we've identified all kinds of issues and opportunities. We've started writing monthly neighborhood updates. And 2 days ago, we just hosted our first interdepartmental meeting. We've also created some guidelines and criteria for a new grant program called My Great Neighborhoods Fund, which is a matching program up to $5,000. So think of these projects as quicker, easier, cheaper. And we have $120,000 a year to give out. So it's primarily placemaking based physical legacy in the public realm. We are already identifying a dozen or more challenges with this grant. So we're asking, you know, we're working through it internally with the staff and really crossing our fingers and hoping it works. We've started attending the neighborhood association meetings that pretty typically happen monthly. So for the 3 of us, we've divided up the city and chosen different neighborhoods. And so for myself, I have 5 of the neighborhoods, and each of my colleagues have 4. And so we're out now monthly talking to the neighborhood associations, hearing their concerns, and learning a whole lot about them. We've also created some neighborhood profiles, and I have an example of this here to show you in a couple of slides. So inside of our research phase, we found a number of challenges, and when we looked at them and we thought, how can we handle these in a really proactive manner? So we've created some potential solutions and approaches. But, so as I've already mentioned, it's the department-based approach to planning as opposed to having our work plan now sorted by neighborhoods. It seems so simple, but it wasn't anything that we were thinking of in the past. We had a lot of, one of our challenges is how we share information between departments and out into the community. And so our interdepartmental team is going to assist us in kind of breaking down that lack of information sharing. One of the big challenges that we have is, as I'm sure you guys all feel this, City Hall, we're very risk adverse here. And it's going to take something to really shift our culture from regulator to facilitator. But the neighborhood team, we feel very confident that we can go out and facilitate a lot of conversations and between staff and council and residents and try to come to a yes. And that's really what we've agreed our role is to work and support and empower our neighborhoods and residents and really work hard to get to a yes with them. So it might not be their exact idea, but to come up with something that meets all of the needs of the regulations and fulfills on the intention of what the neighbors were wanting. So we recognize that everything takes time, and for me that's really frustrating because I want change to happen overnight. But we're working on a paradigm shift, really. So it's exciting and challenging, and we're experiencing lots of clunky, and every time my director sees me kind of start to get anxious about something or frustrated with how slow it goes, she's just like, Kimberly, embrace the clunky. So some of the best practice research that we took on, of course, we looked at Edmonton and Seattle, but we also checked out Calgary, Ottawa, Portland, Chattanooga. If you guys haven't ever looked at them, you should. Kind of interesting stuff there. Hamilton, of course. Vancouver's doing a little bit of work in neighborhoods, and Kitchener, of course. So we were really interested to see how you guys all set up your teams up, what department you lived in City Hall, what kinds of programs and policies you were setting up, and what kinds of outcomes you were going after. So you should feel great, pat yourself on the back, because I think everybody played a role in helping us to form our direction. So these are the neighborhood profiles I mentioned a little bit earlier, and we started with looking at census data and then what we had internally in our open data sources. Neighborhood by neighborhood, let's get a snapshot. So you can see we've got the population and household breakdown, and we looked in our OCP and said, where are the village centers? We went to parks, and I said, give me all the parkland by neighborhood, and we looked at our biking infrastructure, where we had food gardens, where the schools were, if there were shelters or free meals. We also identified immediate contacts, so who the council liaison is, who the neighborhood coordinator, and any other staff that are that work directly in specific neighborhoods, like our building inspectors and our local area planners. If there's a community center, you can see we've identified that information and a contact there. In the example I'm showing you, this is one of our larger neighborhoods. They actually have two community centers. One is more children and family oriented, and the other is senior center. And we've identified the neighborhood association information as well. So really it's a snapshot at a glance. Our first audience for this are internal, so it's our council and staff. And once we dot the I's and cross the T's on this, there's just a couple of tiny little changes that we want to make yet. And then we'll be posting them on our website and sending them through to the neighborhood associations and asking them to post them on their websites so that we can really start to share this information far and wide. We're also doing a bunch of neighborhood plans right now as well. So our planning department's doing something much more robust in terms of land use and heritage and where the arts and culture spots are and the registered houses on the heritage registry, things like that. So much more in depth than and meant for a very different audience and a different use. So something else that we've done for the first time is we've actually mapped our capital works project. And so on this slide you can see down in the bottom sort of right-hand side a big brown, I'll say it's a line, a very thick line across the water, and that's our Johnson Street Bridge, brand new project, a new bridge being built. And but you can also see some red lines there, which are transportation projects, and some green lines, which are stormwater projects. And then when you run over these in our VIC map, which is live on our internet on our webpage, and you roll your cursor over them, there's a box that pops up and says what the work is being done and the schedule once that schedule is put in. And if you have any questions, there's a contact person. So someone can call and get a live person on the other end who can answer any inquiries right away. And so we've created these neighborhood monthly updates. We're calling them hot sheets. And these are provided to the council liaisons. We're trying to figure out the schedule, but we're aiming for 3 days now before the neighborhood meetings actually happen. And the councilors are sharing these widely with the neighborhood associations. They often forward them along to them so that these can be captured in the minutes. The councilors will speak to these at the neighborhood association meetings, and if there's any kind of concerns or comments going on in the neighborhoods, we capture those when we're at those meetings, and make sure that we note them so that they're not just voiced and then left, and so people can see, yes, we've noted that these are these are upsets or concerns, and we're going to be working on them and trying to come to some kind of resolution. So we haven't really got a formal distribution to the residents yet, other than through the neighborhood associations, but we anticipate being able to do this hopefully through mailing lists. We're not quite sure yet. It's one of the things we're really grappling with is how to engage new voices. So what's next for us? We have a few things in the works. We are developing some toolkits to support the neighborhood capacity building. So one of the requests that's come back is a City Hall 101, so that we can sit down and explain to them the organizational chart, the financial planning process, the how the work plan comes into play, and a little bit of who's who in the zoo. So people can feel comfortable actually coming into City Hall and or calling us and feeling like they're going to get the answer as opposed to being frustrated. We're working really hard on individual web pages for our neighborhoods as well. we've got a lot more information to add to these profiles, and but right now we're limited by the architecture of the website. So that's being fixed, and then but we've got the storyboards ready to go. As soon as the architecture of the website is managed, then we'll be able to start really putting in a lot of information. One of the things we're really excited about is providing the community, the residents, an opportunity to contribute their own stories and photos about what makes their neighborhood really unique. We're going to be supporting and facilitating community placemaking initiatives, as I mentioned, through the Great Neighborhoods Grant, and supporting the planning department on their local area planning process, and from that coming up with some neighborhood action strategies so that between the city and the community, we can look at different projects and suggest that this might be something that the community want to take on, and they can apply for a grant for that, or this is something that is quite big and complex in nature, and but important to the neighborhood, so something that we can get on our work plan in the future. We also are going to pilot this City Hall on the Go. That's just a name I made up for it. We're all playing around with it. But really it's an opportunity for staff to get out into the neighborhoods, to meet informally with residents outside of the neighborhood association meetings, and a way for us to promote internal programs and gather ideas on how we can improve our service, and generally provide residents an opportunity to ask staff questions about services and work plans. We envision being at farmers markets and festivals in the summer, and in the village centers on boulevards. This little lemonade stand, this is kind of an idea we're playing with that's really outside the box. It's not your traditional pop-up sunshade with a bunch of display boards and you know, kind of like the staff waiting for people to come to us. We want to attract people to come and say, you know, what is this, right? Give them a glass of lemonade, or have them, you know, sit down and look at their neighborhood map and talk about where their issues are, and where they've got suggestions on how to animate areas, and really just have an informal but pleasant conversation with people. So we're working on our display and the content, things like how portable is it, and how many people is it going to take to set up, and but we want to try to make it a little jazzy and outside the box, and just something a little bit different. So, so this is what we've got on our plate for the next few months, and at that, I'm happy to take any comments and feedback.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I have a few questions myself, but maybe I'll open it up to others. Does anyone else on the call have a question for Kimberly?
Hi, Kim, I had a question.
Okay.
Hi, Kimberly. I was just asking about the, you had the one slide with the neighborhood profiles and yes, and the hot sheets. So I don't know if I missed this. Who is generating this information, and how much of it is being generated by the rest of the people in the neighborhoods themselves?
Right. So the profiles that was generated internally by staff, and we don't expect this information to change very much. So it's going to be a little bit static. But the hot sheets are generated by myself and my colleagues every month. We contact our other colleagues throughout the other departments. We can go on to certain calendars, or we have a special events calendar, and so you can see there's an actual section there, so we can look a month ahead and say what special events are going to be happening in the neighborhood, and then that prepares them for road closures and things like that. If you look on the right, on the third page on the far right where it says land development, we have an app called Development Tracker, and it's on our website, and you can go and you can look at any development in the city that requires a rezoning or a development permit or a development variance. And you can see the status of it right there. So that's all in the open data that we have here. And so we go into the development tracker and look at it by neighborhood and then just capture the most current developments that are underway. So, and then if people have other questions, we can point them to the development tracker or go on ourselves and find the answers for them. But the hot sheets are, right now, they're a lot of work. And we are really hoping to streamline them and have the staff, all city staff, have that in mind so that they can just start feeding us information so they become a lot less resource intense. But right now, while we're working out this, because this is only the 3rd month we've published these, and then this month looks dramatically different than the last 2 for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. It looks great. This is brilliant.
Thanks.
Hi, Kimberly. This is Jerry with City of Lethbridge. Just a very quick question. With your neighborhoods, you identified that there's 13 neighborhoods in the City of Victoria. Is that correct?
13 very interesting, different, unique groups of residents.
Okay. And what's the approximate size of each of these neighborhoods in regards to residents or households?
So they will run anywhere from the smallest one is about, well, the smallest one is downtown, and it's got about 2,700 residents. So
okay.
A little over 1,900 households. And the largest one is about 12,000 residents, and so that's about 7,000 households.
Okay. And how do you find working with the larger neighborhoods, such as one with 12,000 residents? And has there ever been discussion to sort of create smaller sections of these neighborhoods?
So some of them do have some natural smaller sections. So for example, Fairfield, which is our largest neighborhood, it has this really great village area where there's quite a concentration, and so a lot of multifamily dwellings in the village, and then the rest of the neighborhood are single-family dwellings. So we often will work with the Cook Street Village area, and in fact, the businesses down there have just formed their own business association. Okay. In the downtown core, they've broken off into smaller groups too, but primarily they're at a commercial level as well, like smaller business groups to form Antique Row or Lower Johnson or one of the alleys. But okay. Yeah, it's interesting because we just launched the neighborhood planning process in Fairfield, and on Saturday was the launch, and so 12,000 residents and only 100 people showed up.
Oh, that's okay. Answer both.
Sorry for the background noise there.
Oh, okay. But so clearly that we're going to have to do some more work to reach out to the residents to get them to get some new voices involved. We have another one launching at the end of May, and they're a neighborhood of about 5,000 or so, and they're already, they've already got mail drops organized to every single household. So, they're ready to go. They just want their poster, so they can start advertising it and using their festival in May to bring people forward and get them out and participate. But each neighborhood is really different. It really depends on however many issues are upsetting people. I mean, to be really blunt, if they're not upset, they're not interested in really, We have a really activist, heavily activist city.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much. That answers lots of good questions.
This is David
from Calgary. Just back onto the hot sheet, the neighborhood. Here in Calgary, like we do similar stuff in a variety of our business units on these, monthly updates, whether it's around neighborhoods or divisions or regions and all stuff. And one of the areas that we've been trying to focus within our culture of the city is to getting people to use the tools that are available to it's being a very large city, and a dynamic organization, we have an incredible big data tools, and so we're trying to move away and getting people just to go and use those tools instead of gathering all this information that electronically it's there. I have my, it always opens up on my computer our 311 dashboard, and it shows instantly what's our service requests and all that stuff. But we have all this stuff, and that really helps. And my point is it's working. It's helping people change the habits and using the resources that are right there. So just a comment.
Yeah, no, that's great, and that's one of the things with the development tracker.
Yeah.
That's a really new tool for us, and so you can, at the bottom on page 4, which isn't on this, but it says, for information, right, go to the development tracker and here's the URL. So really trying to educate and push people to that. But I agree, tools are these kinds of tools where the information is changing a lot is really valuable. And we have a special events calendar on our webpage too.
Yeah.
But the information is it's like in a number of different places right now, and it's something that as a city we have to really be looking at. What are the apps? What are the tools that make sense for us to use, and how can we compile this information in a really user-friendly way?
Yeah, and I would agree, and it's not about even developing apps for every single thing, or it's ensuring that these things are combined, and that if you click on it or something, it's real time. Because I think we see that we've got an app for road work, but there's also a app for water work, and those have now combined to My Calgary Services, similar to what you were presenting there. So it's that's the important thing. So it's all kind of there, and it's always updating in real time.
Yeah, totally agreed. I mean, the last thing you want is to be sending people, to a dozen different apps to get the information that they want instead of a dozen different people. I mean, that's just as bad, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Hi, Kimberly. It's Michelle from Kitchener. I was curious with your comment about your slide with challenges and opportunities, and one of them was about you mentioned that cities are risk adverse, and this notion of how do we maybe move from the regulator to the facilitator. We've been having a very similar discussion here in Kitchener, and we've been framing it around the move from a rule enforcer to a neighborhood supporter. So obviously a very similar concept. Just wondering if you can elaborate on some of the other things you might be doing right now to help you work towards that, because that's kind of, I feel like when we look at other municipalities, we can find a lot about maybe some of the more public-facing things, but obviously some of these internal things that we're working with aren't always as readily available. So I'd just be curious what other things you're doing.
Yeah, right now we're really focusing on this interdepartmental team.
Okay.
And just really getting staff to stop emailing each other and pick up the phone or go to their desk. And that's such a huge thing in building relationships, right? And we have our department unfortunately has a bit of a reputation for being a bottleneck and of information flow, which is really weird because it's partly communications. But and there's some fear about what is this new neighborhood team, and are we taking over, and stuff like that, right? So we've spent a lot of time just going and meeting with and pulling together a couple of staff and saying, we need your expertise on this. And we've had this inquiry from this resident, this, they want to take on something like a boulevard enhancement project. And, we've just created some boulevard guidelines, which are great, but they only go, 2 steps forward, really. And the residents want to take them 3 and 4 steps forward. So I can give you something like really concrete. So the boulevard gardening is literally about plants and, and how tall they can be and how far from a stop sign they can be, and, they have to be, and things like that. But our residents want to put furniture on the boulevard. And they want to create these little sitting spaces, and which are like great ideas, So they're creating these bumping spots where they can just be out there with a cup of coffee, and their neighbor can come and join them with a cup of coffee, and that they wouldn't normally do that. And so, but furniture isn't covered in the boulevard guidelines. So we become that facilitator, right? So we'll go to parks and we'll say, okay, so this is the idea. And what do you think? And what kind of recommendations can you use for ground cover here? And what are they allowed to do? And they've asked about this. And so we're really kind of the intermediary. And we're really having some success by pulling, we pull these teams together from transportation and road works and parks primarily. Maybe occasionally bylaw will come in. And we'll say, okay, you guys, we'll lay out the plan, and we'll generate a lot of enthusiasm about it, and say, how can we make this happen, right? And so they kind of pick up on the enthusiasm, and they go from this really staunch, nope, it's not happening, to okay, so this is a consideration here, and we need to pull the underground map so we know if they need to call before they dig, and different things like that. And so we've had some really great success just by breaking down that old culture internally.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. There's a lot to be said about building relationships with your colleagues. I guess I can't stress that enough.
It's Christy here, Kimberly. I have a question for you around, it seems that you mentioned the neighborhood associations quite a few times and the important role that they play. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit sort of about the state of the associations before 2015 and what's the state of them now and how the city helps support them, if at all.
Sure. So we have for a long time, like 20 or 25 years now, given the neighborhood associations a grant based on the number of residents in their neighborhood. And so right now we pay 75 cents per person, and these are based on census data. So they get this base grant that allows them to rent meeting space if they need to set up communications, so help them pay for their website or their newsletter or things like that, and to have an annual community celebration. So the neighborhood associations have existed for a very long time. They tend to attract, as I used the word before, activists. So they don't always represent the neighborhood view. They might represent their association view. And they also do land use reviews for us. So anytime a development comes in, we will send it out to the land use committee at the neighborhood association and have them gather the residents' feedback and send that into us. So that's kind of how they were. And in the past, many years ago, staff would go to make a presentation about some work that we might have been doing, and then the association would use it as an opportunity to basically ask that staff person any question that they wanted, or to basically attack them because they didn't appreciate or agree with the work that was going on at City Hall. And I would say about 7 or 8 years ago, staff were directed to stop attending association meetings. You know, I mean, I attended one meeting. I wasn't presenting, thank goodness, but one of my colleagues was, and it was terrible. It was so awful how badly she was treated. And I took her home. She was just in tears. And it wasn't long after that where the directors just said, you know what, we're not putting our staff out there to be used like that. If the neighborhood associations you know, want to express concerns or upset, they'll do that through us and or through council. So so last year, with this whole new perspective on neighborhoods, it meant that we needed to connect and create relationships with these neighborhood associations. And I got to tell you, there was a little bit of apprehension about doing this. So, but one of the things, though, that the three of us have worked really hard to do is to create relationships with them, and not just the board president, but with all of the board members, and to talk to community, to residents if they come out to these meetings as well. So just, you know, just to be there and be a friendly face, and sometimes bring good news like, oh, hey, there's a grant for that, you know. They love to hear that. And so in the last, myself, because I've been working in this role for a little while, and with Mike and Gary over the last year, the relationship building has been the most important thing. So we're still looking at, like, what is the role the neighborhood association plays, how much credence do we put to their perspective, and how do we support them to reach more people. So because they're already established, they're an easy way for us to get out into the neighborhood. But we recognize that they're not the only way for us to go and talk to residents. But we also want to respect them, the role that they play, and support them. So as part of our toolkits, we're looking at board development, right? Where are the existing training opportunities, and letting them know that, you know, that there's this workshop that they can take on governance, or there's this other workshop that they can take on, you know, how to engage more volunteers, you know, things like that. So we're really looking to build capacity with the neighborhood associations, and at the same time build really good relationships with them so they start to trust us more. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I have another question, but I don't want to take it away from other people who are on the call.
I was going to kind of build, it's Dave again from Calgary, on this about community associations or neighborhood associations, and you answered a lot or commented on a lot of things where I was going to build on my question, but maybe for the whole group, you know, we probably all struggle with this same issue about these things, these entities called neighborhood associations or community associations, and the question is, how can we switch it up? How can we do something different? Or what is a different way to approach this? Because, you know, we're moving into a different era of that. Are these organizations the right entity, the right structure for neighborhood? You know, is neighborhood really just a geographical area, or is it a community of something, a community of interest of some there? So, you know, just throwing out that fundamental question, can we do this differently, you know, that we have there, and or are community associations the easy way to answer something that for the neighborhood? So I was throwing that out.
I had a really interesting conversation with a young fellow who was in his 20s. He called me and he said, I'm really interested in my neighborhood, but I will not go to that my neighborhood association meeting because they're all just a bunch of old people who don't want anything to change. And you know, I've been trying to get my friends to come out, but they they're young families, and at 7 o'clock it doesn't work for them because they're putting their kids to bed. And he said, and I don't like how anti everything that they are. And he was speaking specifically about this one neighborhood. And he suggested that could we try doing like an e-neighborhood town hall and creating something. So I was like, yeah, why not? Do you want to go talk to some of your friends and see if you can rally some interest? And from our side, we've got the e-town hall technology already set up. So there's no reason why we couldn't try to have other conversations with residents, but doing it electronically. And so he's just going away, and he was pretty excited by the fact that that there was some grit, some traction to his idea. So that's one thing that we can do. We're going to talk to our residents when we go out with our quote-unquote lemonade stand, and ask them, just like, how can we give you the information that you need? In City Hall, we sit there and we think, well, we could send a newsletter. So then we create this newsletter, but we don't know if it's even read. Okay, well, let's create an e-newsletter where people have to sign up, right? And then it's always a struggle about, well, what do we put in that e-newsletter now, right? So I totally hear you. But I like your comment about communities of interest. And, we have sports communities and faith communities and school communities. And, so they already exist. And I think it's like figuring out how to wiggle our way in a positive way with them.
And I agree. When I've held numerous roles in the city of Calgary, and one of them was as an executive assistant to the director of planning, and I used to challenge my planning staff that they said, oh, the community association said this, and I said, well, to me that was your easy way. You just picked up the phone and called. Like, how are they actually representing? Did you call these other community of interest? Did you get into that? Because it was the easy thing to do. That you had Mr. Rupinder, as the president of this association, and you called, and which, yes, it's relationship building, but challenge yourself to see what else is in those neighborhoods, those entities, and and this is just my soapbox on this. I just think that we as cities and organizations that we talk about, oh, the community associations don't represent the neighborhood, but we also then promote them through variety of systems, helping them with web pages and granting and all this stuff. So we are facilitating their existence still. And I just, they are important, and they're people of interest that are, I fully agree that they are volunteering and they're doing it. But maybe it's a chance to start re-looking at the way that we do these things. So thanks for my soapbox.
I was just going to, it's Michelle again, I was just going to quickly add, I know we're probably nearing the end of this discussion today, but similarly to this line of thought, one of the things that we thought was really important in our strategy is absolutely acknowledging that our neighborhood associations do not reflect the entire population within individual neighborhoods. And so we took a proactive approach to develop a list of exactly what David referred to, these different kind of communities in that are within the city as a whole. And so we actually came up with a list of over 1,000 organizations. So anything from, like Girl Guide and Boy Scout groups to faith-based groups to peer support groups to groups that represent people with disabilities, like huge list of people, and we're doing some strategic reach out to start to build those relationships and hopefully encourage them to participate now as we develop our strategy, but then obviously the hope would be in the long term that they also have an vested interest in the neighborhood work moving forward.
Yeah, I agree.
It's Ikemia. I think that just for the last comment, I think that's a really useful way of getting as much of a diversity of voices into the conversations as possible. The challenge that you end up with at some point is that if unless the space is an online space or a virtual space that is open to anyone to join and contribute, then you're going to have to at some point curate who gets to speak, either by knowing that I can reach out to this community or knowing that X community exists. Someone is going to have to make the decision about which community and which voice gets added to the conversation. But if it is since you're also looking at potential online communities or virtual communities of practice, then it ends up being a bit more open to everyone. Even those who you may not know want to have a voice or need to have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree a little bit, but I think that one of the bits is from a city that, and I think Kimberly mentioned, is that about being that facilitator, that bridge builder, or connector. That if a community of interest that they want, a group wants to get something done, you know, let's get chairs in the boulevard things. If there's interest and there's that there, let that happen, but then not saying, oh, hey, can you go and help us do this and this? Sometimes we just need to, okay, you've done, and move on to the next thing, and it happens. Sometimes we think these communities have to always be there, and they should be just dynamic, move in and out, you know, form, unform, kind of that, and let it self-regulate into what transpire. And as us as neighborhood community development people, being that facilitator and that bridge breaker, as we were discussing.
This is really great to hear all these different perspectives. I noticed that Janet from Waterloo has her hand up for quite some time and was being so polite. Janet, do you have a question or a comment before we?
Yeah, just a really quick question. In Waterloo, about half of our residents live in areas with neighborhood associations, and our neighborhood associations tend to not be very advocacy oriented. They tend to be more focused on events in neighborhoods. But what we struggle with is the areas where there isn't a neighborhood association. We haven't had a great deal of success in terms of encouraging people to start a neighborhood association. So I was wondering, from the Victoria perspective, if you have that experience and how you are managing it.
We actually have an abundance of neighborhood associations, and so in two of our neighborhoods, as I said, one neighborhood actually split in half. So there's the North Neighborhood and the South Neighborhood Association, and in another neighborhood, there was just such infighting in one of the neighborhood associations about a dozen years ago that a group of them just split off and created another one. And so we recognize both of them, or all of them, and we divide our grant up. They don't like that, but we've told them if they can't work together, then they each get 50% of the grant, right? And so, you know, so they're always like grumbling about that, but they still exist, and they're still out there doing the work that they want to do. So I don't have anything to say about how to start a new one. In fact, I might shudder because I sense there's a new one in the works in one of my neighborhoods. So.
Thank you.
But does anyone else? Can anyone else contribute that? Answer that question?
I can certainly do that. That's actually where we're at in Lethbridge right now. We are just working on building more neighborhood groups, and so we've developed some resources in that area. So if you want to connect with me further at some point, I'm certainly open to that. And
this is Dave in Calgary. I'm not the person that's working on our community association. We have Carolyn Tooth is. So if you wanted to just email me, we are re-looking at how we support our neighborhood associations and our community associations and these dynamics. So we have a couple of people on this team. I've been with the City of Calgary for 10 years, and it's been a big big thing. We have associations that are closing up and merging, and some wanting to expand, and whole dynamics.
And David, you guys have you have a lot of neighborhood associations, don't you? I heard in the hundreds.
Yes, yeah, or more than hundreds. Yeah. So we and then we have resident associations, and we have a variety of different dynamics on how they're formed, and we have community associations that are inside of residents associations, and it's quite a fascinating dynamic, and some are very representative of those physical geographical neighborhoods, and others it's the same board members for the last 30 years kind of idea. So which I think all cities and communities struggle with. We're not unique. So
close it by saying I watched my first episode of Parks and Recreation last night. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this show, but what I took from that was it was so great, because she just said, when I hear people yelling at neighborhood meetings, it's because they care so much. And so when people yell at me, I just hear really loud caring.
That's right.
That's awesome. And correct.
I love that.
You don't want a quiet and somber neighborhood meeting.
Yeah.
No, that's true. One of my mentors, she said, if you're not hearing anything, that's when you're in trouble.
Yeah. Right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Go ahead.
We really appreciate your presentation, Kimberly, and your insights, and you obviously raised some really important things that you're working through, that it's wonderful to hear that others are experiencing the same thing. So.
Great. Well, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity for doing this. It was a really good, as I said, it's kind of like a little bit of an archive for us. So, and it's nice to share some of these ideas out with people who are already doing this. And if anybody wants to send me anything by email, any ideas or whatnot, I'm happy to continue this conversation.
Great.
Wonderful. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.